Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. I'm excited to be here. We have a lot of fun stuff to cover today talking about ChatGPT. And this is going to be kind of like a high-level overview, and I promise not to jump scare anyone with any crazy math equations. It'll be nice and fun. Hopefully, we'll all learn something today. And by the end, I hope we all have a better understanding of some of the main components that make ChatGPT run as well as it does. And let's get right into it. So, ChatGPT, it's a big deal these days. It is the premier LLM used the most, and there's a lot of data that's coming out about it. For example, if we look at this here, we can see that ChatGPT was the second fastest company to reach 1 million users behind Threads, which was kind of connected to Instagram. So as a standalone, it did really well. And then we can also see the user base is just rising. If we see there, the month-to-month change, it's going up, and it'll probably continue to go up. So it's definitely something good to learn about as we go through this presentation. Here, I actually pulled this from CBS News. They have a whole page just dedicated to ChatGPT news, which is really fun. It's definitely blowing up, and people want to learn about it. And then lastly, I did a quick little research, just looked at ChatGPT and Google Scholar, and then a lot of results popped up. People are interested in it. They want to see what's happening behind the scenes. They want to know what ChatGPT is all about. So before we get started, let's do a little interactive game. Has anyone ever heard of the emoji game? Feel free to type in chat if you have. We're going to do one quick example right now. The first emoji set I'm going to show is right here. Can anyone guess the word or show that this might be correlated to? Anyone have any answers? Feel free to pop them in chat. Has anyone have any guesses on what these emojis could mean? Yeah, Calista is correct. This is supposed to represent Ted Lasso, the show. Right? Yeah, we have a couple answers. Same with Matthew. Yep, Ted Lasso. So it's really interesting, right? We're able to see these. Why do we understand what these images mean, right? It was just a collection of 4 emojis, but we were able to kind of associate meaning with it. We knew what it meant because we'd seen the show Ted Lasso. So we saw the American flag, the guy with the mustache, soccer ball, and the English flag, and we could kind of put it all together. So I want you to keep that in the back of your mind as we go through this presentation, trying to think about why do we understand what these words mean? And maybe think of like a one-word summary of why we might know that. All right. So now let's get right into the overview of ChatGPT. And I found that when I was thinking about ChatGPT, the easiest way to explain it is actually just to kind of look at the second part of the name. Generative pre-trained transformer. Now these are kind of some vague words, very big words, but if we break it down, we can kind of start to understand what ChatGPT actually does. So if we're looking at generative, this is the most simple, right? It just means we're going to output something. It's going to make something, it'll output something. Could be images, could be text. That's what we're looking at. Then pre-trained. In a little bit, we'll talk about what it means to actually be pre-trained. It's kind of a funny word, right? Like you think you have to train something, but this is pre-trained. And then the third thing we're going to look at is the actual transformer architecture. Now we're going to break this down, make it super simple to understand. Let's hop right into it by first looking at what it means to be pre-trained. And better yet, what does it mean to be trained at all? And when I think of training, I often go to this image here of dog training, right? Everyone's heard of it, and there's a million different techniques to training, right? There's so many different ways you can train a dog, and everyone on the internet thinks they have the right way, right? So there's a lot of different ways to train. So we're going to look at a couple different ways now. Does anyone can think of any ways that they train dogs? They have any tips or techniques? Some people use a clicker and treats. Some people use certain kinds of leashes. Some people use, S-bags. Some people use, treats. These are all super common ways to train animals, right? And we have multiple ways of doing that with these different models, right? The most common way that we train is called supervised training. Now, supervised training, breaking down simply, means that we have someone behind a computer, right? Or maybe like an expert professional dealing with a certain thing, and they label things, right? So we look here, this person is labeling that a bird image is a bird and that a squirrel image is a squirrel, right? So they're giving things explicit labels. That way the model or whatever is training knows exactly what it needs to look for, right? We're giving it certain targets to hit. And they have to be labeled by humans, though, in order for them to learn. And then eventually they'll be able to label them themselves. But can anyone in the chat think of any reasons why this might be bad? Why this might not work, especially when we're dealing with an LLM like ChatGPT, where there's a lot of data, there's a lot of different things happening. Does anyone have any suggestions of why this might not work? One thing I can think of right off the bat is it's expensive, right? It's super expensive to pay people to look through a bunch of data, label it, think of the best practices for the model to make. It just doesn't work. Yeah. And there's going to be a lot of repetition, right? Bias. These are big things. And also it's kind of an older standard, right? This was like pre-ChatGPT 1. They were testing just having someone in the lab doing all of the labeling. And there's also just not enough. We can't keep up. There's going to be tons and tons of text coming in. We won't be able to keep up and label it all ourselves. So that's why we start with the concept of generative pre-training. Now, essentially what we do is we give it some ground rules, right? We say, okay, I want you to look for a bunch of data that is similar to what we're going to use, and we're just going to give you a ton of it. Better yet, let's just give it the whole internet. That's what they did with ChatGPT. They said, go out, find rules, find patterns, find different things. You're not essentially learning anything, but you're just looking for the patterns and rules that people use in everyday text, right? And I kind of summarize that here, where you look through the data, you want to develop rules and relationships between the text. And then someone will come in later and kind of fine tune some things, make sure that it's actually following like grammatical standards, proper, capitalizations, things like that, making sure it looks right. And the way I like to describe this is, if we have any procrastinators, we all know that moment when you're sitting at your desk trying to just engorge a bunch of different information. Nothing's really sticking, but you're just trying to memorize stuff, right? You're just trying to memorize structures, important facts. You're not really fully understanding things, but it's enough to mimic, right? It's enough to say, okay, I've memorized these things specifically. Let's just keep that there. I'm going to use it really quick, but I don't really know what's happening at all. So in order to combat this or to apply with this, we actually have the transformer architecture. Now, looking at this, it looks super complicated, right? But the main thing I want to focus on is the fact that there's two kind of distinct structures. There's one on the left, and then there's one on the right. We'll talk about what each of these structures do and how they work together. But this is what complements that generative pre-training, right? So we've essentially pre-trained our model. So it's seen a bunch of different things. It knows patterns. It knows different rule sets. Now we're going to put it into our transformer architecture. And the first step to that is going to be the encoder. So this left section here is the encoder. And we're going to kind of just talk about it as the main goal of the encoder is turning words into meaning, right? We're turning the input into meaning. And how does it do this? Well, one thing we definitely have to do first is we have to turn words into numbers. We need to have number representations, and that's why we have vectors and different like math representations of numbers. That's not really important for the overall understanding, but important to realize that the machine's actually turning everything into numbers. All right. And the reason why it's so effective, we're going to learn is self-attention. So once these words are turned into numbers, they're actually all compared to each other. You see here how we have like the red strings kind of going back and forth between the different words. Every single word is comparing to each other. That way we have the model has a full understanding of what exactly is being said, right? This helps detect like anything like sarcasm, maybe, and it learns that from its rule set earlier too, like with the pre-training. So self-attention is key, basically figuring out how the words relate to each other. So the encoder is dealing with all this input, right? Turns it into a number representation, then compares the input to each other, and then gives it to the next step, which is the decoder. Decoder is this right side, right? And if the encoder helps us read the writing, the decoder is our writer, right? It'll write the response one word at a time, So if you've ever seen ChatGPT kind of reason something out, you see that it writes kind of one word at a time. And every word will influence the next word. So it'll think about what it just said previously, and it'll keep having that influence as it goes through the sentence. I kind of want to talk about the summary of it because it's not just thinking about the previous word. It also remembers, like I said, it's not thinking just about the previous word. It remembers what it said. It's also remembering what you asked. It's keeping the prompt in memory as well. It's trying to make sure that it stays on topic, and it compares to that occasionally as well. So we're comparing to that, and then we're also building word by word, creating a flow. So it's kind of keeping a bunch of these different things in its memory called a window to make sure that it completes like a good summary of what you want, or follows the prompt, doesn't stay off topic, and still has a good flow. Now, this is kind of a lot of like technical stuff, so I wanted to put together an analogy that everyone I think could understand as well, and maybe something to help remember. So we're going to be looking at a chef. I love cooking personally. I don't know if we have any other cooks in the chat, but I love cooking. And I thought about, how does this relate to becoming a chef? And so I started writing it out. And I thought, okay, the pre-training is like culinary school, right? We learn the flavors, the techniques. You start to understand how different ingredients work together. You're learning rules, right? You're learning everything. Oh, we have more cooks in the chat too. That's awesome. So the pre-training is culinary school, right? And then we look at the encoder. The encoder is essentially giving the chef an ingredient list and cuisine, right? So you're saying, okay, I want to make Mediterranean food. Here's your ingredient list. And then the chef will kind of start to understand how each component, figure out how they work together, right? So we're dealing with specifics now. We learned our rule base in culinary school. We learned the flavors, the techniques. Now we're using the encoder and we're saying, okay, let's understand what we're actually given now, which is the ingredient list and cuisine, and try and think of a different recipe to use. And then once they understand the input, right, the chef will then start cooking the dish. Create a dish in steps, right? So we're going to go step by step, word by word, like how it does in the LLM, considering the current taste. So we're going to be kind of looking at what we've written so far or what we've cooked so far. And we're also going to be kind of checking back in and make sure, okay, are we still making Mediterranean food, or are we still working with the right ingredients? And this is essentially what ChatGPT is doing under the hood, right? Starts with that culinary school, gets the ingredient list, gets the cuisine, cooks the dish. And then in the case of the LLM, right, pre-trains on big data, a bunch of data, pretty much the whole internet. Figures out exactly what the user's trying to say with the encoder. It says, okay, this is what this text means, this is what that text means. Let's put it into now our decoder, and we can create the dish thinking about not only what we're flowing out right now, what we're texting out right now, how it relates to the prompt, and what exactly we're trying to say. So this is how I like to think about it. So if you want to bring anything out of this, it's maybe think about how a chef relates to ChatGPT. All right. Now here's kind of the thing here. After hearing the main components of the model, let's revisit that opening question, right? So if you want to take a minute in chat, maybe think about that opening question. What's one word we could use to describe why we understand images, why we understand kind of these vague concepts so well? So let's take a moment here. I'm going to check out chat, see if we have any answers. Just one word kind of describing why we might know these things. Connections. Yeah, that's a good answer. Experience, associations, we're all kind of hitting the same thing. Wait, we have a winner. Yeah, Barry hit it right on. I summarize it as context, right? It is definitely context. Yeah, and then the models use the context. Yeah, that's great. But the reason why ChatGPT has taken such a good stride is because it's opening up its context. In the past, we had a lot of language models that wouldn't have enough context, right? It would hear what you're saying, and then it would start writing, and then it would get lost in its own writing and would forget about the prompt, right? And I mean, we've all been there too. Think about the time you heard something out of context and you kind of did a double take. Maybe you're accidentally hearing in on a conversation like, whoa, what are they talking about? But you knew if you had the right context, you would kind of understand if it was like a joke or if there was just something else going on. We've definitely all been there. So when we add context, we start to have a lot more understanding, especially in these models. And that is exactly what it's doing. So if there's one thing I want you to take away, the main concept of ChatGPT and the reason why it works so well is it just has an exorbitant amount of context from the pre-training to the encoder to the decoder, it's using its past experience well. It's not really magic. It's not doing anything crazy. It's just remembering things that it said, what you've said, and what it's been trained on. Those are the essential things. Now, some things to remember is that ChatGPT is a useful tool, but there's some things to look out for. These are just some things I want to talk about briefly that, are good to look out for. Recently, there's been a lot of talk about how ChatGPT users are complaining about the bot's relentlessly positive tone, as seen in this news article. And the reason why it does this is because it's actually complimenting users, because it notices that when it compliments more, users will stay on longer. And ultimately, they just want people to use their platform for as long as possible. So ChatGPT is really smart, and it's figured out, wait, if I just tell people that what they're doing is great and awesome, they'll want to keep talking to me. And that's why we've seen a shift recently from the number one use case of generating ideas in the past, just last year, to now the number one use case is therapy. And, you can see here, there's therapy is the number one use case, organizing their life, finding new purpose. And the reason why these are such high use cases is because it is complementing, it's learning to talk to you. Has anyone noticed too that when you talk to ChatGPT, it kind of starts to maybe sound a bit like you, right? That's because it's keeping its own individual context for you as well. Everyone has their own individual user memory, and then they also have the memory that's been trained on. So that's just something to look out for, is maybe, if it's complimenting you a little too much, you know exactly what it's trying to do, right? Something to keep in mind as you use it. Really interesting. All right. And now that we've kind of talked about ChatGPT and some of its components, right? The encoder, the decoder, generative, pre-generative training, or pre-trained models. Can you think of any new usage ideas for ChatGPT after hearing a little bit more about how it works? And then while everyone's kind of thinking and typing in chat, I'll explain one use we did at my research lab. So we actually used LLMs as a tool to generate example questions for users. Basically, we were studying how did people think about different prompts, right? So for example, if I wrote down apple and I told you to visualize it, some people would see an apple, like a perfectly clear definition, like what an apple looks like. But some people would only see the word apple. They can't actually visualize the images. So what we did was we used LLMs to kind of think of these different sentences, right? Like the green apple fell from the tree, and we had them visualize it. But the issue is we'd have to come up with a bunch of different unique sentences. And so we want ChatGPT, we said, okay, here's the sentence example. The green apple fell from the tree. Generate 5 more sentences that are similar, just changing color and different things like that, and give us those outputs. So it was really fun. We were able to use it for our web experiment. We did the same thing with images as well. We'd show an image and we'd ask them to describe it. It's a really good tool that you can use for a lot of different things. I'm looking in the chat here. Mary's saying it helps figure out software. That's awesome. Yeah, it's great for figuring out software, right? Documentation, syntax, it's so good. I love using it for that as well. Calista says, I've been using it to understand my kids' homework. That's great. Yeah, especially for learning, it can really be helpful. Learning declarative things, it's great. It can show you the right procedures on how to do things. Sometimes it can be a little off, but usually it's pretty good, especially with kids' homework as well. So yeah, that's awesome. And just lastly, the overview, the 3 things I want to go with is like, okay, we learned about the generative part. It just outputs something. That's the simple one, right? We learned what it means to be pre-trained, and we learned about the transformer architecture with the encoder and the decoder. So, maybe even though these steps are used for ChatGPT, we can kind of apply some of the similar ideas, right, to different parts of our life, like education or our work and stuff. For example, when you're maybe thinking about writer, you can think, oh, well, the ChatGPT LLM, when it's writing, it thinks about the prompt. It thinks about what it's writing currently. These different things that we can use to just write ourselves. I've been finding that it's kind of helpful, right, to just think about these as you go through different topics of learning, things like that. All right. That's it for our quick overview. Is there any questions, anything maybe you want to hear more about, or anything at all? I know we might all be eating lunch too. Just where do I see it going in 2 years? The interesting thing about AI in general is that we've kind of seen, I don't know if we can all see my cursor here, but it kind of takes a rise and then it dips, and it takes a rise and then it dips, and it's kind of going steadily up, but it's always had these dips. I think now for the future, we're going to see a steady incremental rise of AI use, of AI research, of AI development. Everything's going to start steadily increasing. And I think in 2 years, we're going to see even more. I think we're going to start focusing on efficiency. Right now, we're using a lot of power, water, and things like that to actually generate these answers. I think we're going to start seeing a shift to efficiency. Like if you've heard of DeepSeek, they found ways to use less resources for very similar results. I think different companies are going to start pushing each other for sure to come up with more efficient and less expensive results. And then looking here, where do you think its true power lies for the future? That's a great question. In my own personal studies and research, I deal a lot with using AI in the health field. And one of the things I do is I look at brainwave data. And we're trying to figure out how different brainwaves kind of represent different actions or even thoughts about actions. That way it can maybe help people with any sort of disability kind of work around their things, or maybe people with prosthetics, right? It can help them use them better. So I could see it using a lot in the health field, again, for image screening too. So like maybe like images that are hard to figure out, like x-rays and MRIs, it could find specific things to look for in there. There's a lot of different power for AI as well. I think too, one thing that we're going to see a lot of that I'm not as fond of is human interaction might be replaced a bit with people with ChatGPT and things like that. People ask them for advice, ask you for relationship advice. I actually just had a friend who did that recently, and I was a bit shocked, but that is, I think, going to be maybe the future. How do you see ChatGPT comparing / differentiating from other market options, Google, Gemini, and other options? Yeah, this is actually a really interesting question too, because a lot of competitors are emerging, right? Google, the big players, and they're really trying to get a foothold in the industry as big as ChatGPT's. And where ChatGPT's strength lie now is that they kind of have like they're developing a package, right, where you can use all of their tools in one platform. And that's something that everyone else is just really far behind on, even Amazon and Google. So their idea is that they're going to have like a complete ChatGPT, and you can use it for image, text, any sort of class. Like you can use all of their platforms on one web page or device, which is something that is really differentiating it, because you won't have to download multiple packages, or you won't have to install different things from Amazon. It's all going to be at one center, and I think that's going to really separate them for now. In the market as well. All right. Thank you all for coming. It's been a great experience putting this together and presenting, and I love some of the suggestions in chat. Thank you all for coming. Thank you. This was really fun.